Good day friends. This is the first of my 3 videos that I'll do on Operation Sindoor. In this video, I'll talk about a lecture given recently by the Director General Military Operations Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai to a conclave of foreign military chiefs in New Delhi. He spoke to them on Operation Sindoor and he said that there is a historical background that needs to be touched upon, and he did. Now, according to Ghai, the problem started in late 80s, obviously in Jammu and Kashmir, and he said since then 28,000 terrorist attacks have happened, 15,000 civilians have been killed, and over 3,000 security people have died. He was obviously referring to the unending Pakistan's proxy war into Jammu and Kashmir. Now, nobody asked Ghai, but let me ask this question, that why is it that the Indian Army continued doing counter-terror operations for decades without getting any results? Why is it that the Indian Army did not think of doing something entirely different, which could have been done, can still be done, to end Pakistan's proxy war in Jammu and Kashmir? Since Ghai would not answer this question, let me answer this question. Yes, the trouble started in Jammu and Kashmir in 1989. And the next year in 1990, the then Army Chief General Rodrigues, he inducted large number of soldiers in Jammu and Kashmir theatre. His successor, General Bipin Joshi, who assumed office in 1993, in my assessment, he made two big mistakes. The first was, he never asked the political leadership what is the end state. End state is important. Whenever the army is used or military is used, it should be told what is the job, how long it has to do the job, and what are the results expected of the army from that job. All this was not asked. So as far as the army was concerned, this operation became open-ended for the army. And the political leadership was happy about it because it gave them the opportunity to not seriously consider the political solution to the Jammu and Kashmir problem. And the second big mistake by General Joshi was that he decided to raise a Rashtriya Rifle Force, which is a specialized counter-terror operation force in large numbers from within the army's resources. In principle, this was a good idea because the counter-terror operations and preparing for a hot war, which is the main job of the Indian Army, are operations which are as different, as dissimilar as chalk and cheese. So what the army chief had in mind was that the officers who are involved in the preparation for the hot war, they should not get deviated or deflected from their main task by doing this counter-terror operations. And he thought, let's have a specialized force doing this. And in his assessment, the RR will not have a job which is a very long job, and very soon it will all be over in Jammu and Kashmir, and RR will be done with and it will merge with the main force. But the problem what happened was that the Indian Army officers who were reluctant to come to the RR from their main job, and the reason for that was they were not sure how their professional profile for promotions would be affected by a tenure in RR. They were held by an order from the army chief which said that coming to the RR, the professional profile for promotions of the officers will not be affected. In fact, it got enhanced. But more of this RR in a while. Then there was another Chief General N.C. Vij. He in 2004, he fenced the line of control with Pakistan. Now nobody fences an active military line, but he did that. And there were two consequences of that. One was, as far as the Indian Army was concerned, now it was to do counter-terror operations within its own territory. And because of that, what happened was, unknowingly, a defensive mindset set in, which is what is called the Maginot mentality. And I believe that when you have a defensive mindset, a soldier's fighting spirit, that offensive spirit, it gets killed. But so be it, he put the fence there. Then there was another chief, General J.J. Singh, who in 2007 he got the Defense Minister A.K. Anthony to release the Indian Army's first sub-conventional warfare doctrine for counter-terror operations. Now, by doing this, a job of the army, the counter-terror job, which was perhaps a secondary job, a tertiary job, or a side job, suddenly became the main job of the Indian army. And its main job, which was fighting for hot war, it took a back seat. And the army was happy about it. They had no problems. Why? Go back to what I was talking about, RR. The RR suddenly realized, the officers who came to RR after this initial hesitancy, that actually they were getting a lot of visibility in this job. This was giving them visibility, it was giving them power, it was giving them status, it was giving them medals, and it was giving them promotions. And more than anything else, they could lord over the Kashmiris, something that they could not do sitting on the line of control, working on their main job, which is fighting for war. And this is the reason that 15 Corps headquarters in Srinagar, which is at the heart of counter-terror operation, suddenly became a place of hot postings. Everybody wanted to be in 15 Corps headquarters. And all the senior officers, they wanted to be there. As a consequence of that, the tenure of the Commander 15 Corps, which was 2 years, it was brought down to 8 to 9 months because of the line of officers who wanted to be 15 Corps commanders. Everybody wanted to be in no war, no peace situation. In fact, when I see on the Wikipedia the profile of the DGMO Rajiv Ghai, he was commissioned in 1989, the year the trouble started in Jammu and Kashmir. He has commanded 15 Corps. Most of his tenure in the service has been in Jammu and Kashmir theatre, and he's had practically all the medals that can be got in the Jammu and Kashmir theatre. Now, here is a point that I want to make. All this was fine, but it did not help the nation. And this is the book that I wrote. This book I wrote in 2000, which is 25 years ago. It is called 10 Myths That Shape India's Image. It's about 10 myths, 10 issues that I have taken up and I have explained them. Let me tell you the title of two such myths, or what I have explained. I have argued in one chapter, 10,000 words, that the army cannot end Pakistan's proxy war in Kashmir unless it builds credible conventional war fighting capabilities, something that it still does not have today. Then in another chapter titled South Asia is a nuclear flashpoint, I argued it is not a nuclear flashpoint. This is a myth of it being a nuclear flashpoint, because in all the wars that we have seen, as far as the western sector is concerned, our west, Pakistan has never been defeated there. That means that the operational level of war, it equals the Indian military. And if indeed it was not powerful enough militarily, then it would have ended the proxy war by itself. So all this talk about a nuclear war, that even today the officers keep talking about, that look, there is a conventional space for a conventional war below the nuclear overhang, I don't think it makes any sense. Because why would Pakistan use nuclear weapons when it can stand up in conventional war to the Indian military? Now, let's get on with the further narrative of the DGMO. Next, he told the audience in his lecture that in 2001, the Indian Parliament was attacked and some kind of mobilization was done. And then, of course, sense prevailed and we came back. Now, what I want to tell Ghai is, it was not some kind of mobilization. This was the biggest mobilization done by the Indian Army since the 1971 war, where the war wastage reserves also were brought in. They were taken out. This mobilization took 3 weeks. And after this mobilization, there was a 10 months military standoff between the two armies. And finally, the Indian Army, without firing a shot, either side firing a shot, the Indian Army came back. in what it called a strategic relocation. Basically, it came back to the barracks. And there are two, three important things that need to be highlighted. Now, the first thing is yes, the parliament was attacked. On the 13th of December 2001, it was a terrorist attack. And on the 16th of December, the army chief, who was also the chairman chiefs of staff committee, General Padmanabhan, he was called by the political leadership. All the details are there in this book that I have written with Lieutenant General V.K. Sood, who retired as the Vice Chief of the Indian Army. This book is called Operation Parakram, The War Unfinished. A book that perhaps Gahi needs to read to understand it was not some kind of mobilization. So, as I was talking, General Padmanabhan was called in, and in Hindi he was told कि आप जनरल साहब mobilization करिए, mobilize general. Now, as far as Padmanabhan was concerned, he was not told what is this mobilization about? Is it for war or is it for military coercion? So, as far as Padmanabhan was concerned, he rightly concluded that the mobilization has to be done for war. Now, after that, we know nothing happened and the troops came back to the barracks. As far as Indian government was concerned, the Vajpayee government was concerned, the defense minister George Fernandez, this is what he said on the 20th of November 2002 to the parliament. He said that Indian military has lost 800 soldiers' lives, and a total which included the wounded was close to 2,000. India also lost 8,000 crore rupees in this Operation Parakram. And what he did not say is that there was a colossal wear and tear on the equipment of the Indian equipment, that it would take 10 years for the Indian army to be again ready for war. And this is the reason that when within 6 years of Operation Parakram, which ended in 2002, after 6 years when the Mumbai attack happened in 2008, the Manmohan Singh government was wise enough not to go to war with Pakistan because the Indian military was not ready for war. It needed more time for the recovery of its wear and tear of the equipment. The other significant thing which came out of Parakram was precisely what Padmanabhan said to the media on 9th of November 2002. And he said, this is important. He said that whenever there is a situation calling for army's help, the army's role should be clearly defined to avoid confusion. In other words, what he was saying is that at the strategic level, there was a massive communication gap between the political and the military leadership of the country during Operation Parakram. Now, before proceeding further, a basic thing about warfare needs to be told to the viewers. When we talk of warfare, we talk of three levels of warfare. At the highest level, we talk about the strategic level of warfare, where the political leadership and the military leadership, they interact with one another. The political leadership clearly conveys or should convey to the military leadership what exactly is required of it in a war, why it must go to war. That should be clearly conveyed. The political objectives. Based on that, then at the second level, which is the intermediate level of war, which is what we call the operational level of war or the campaign level of war, the military leadership job begins, and this is the most important job. And its job is that having been conveyed the political objectives, now it builds on the military aims to achieve those political objectives. So it is at this level, at the operational level of war, that the three service chiefs in our case, who are the top operational commanders of their service, they make the plan for war. And that plan is important because the success of the war depends on their plan. And it's a military plan, it's not a political plan. So this is the most important level of war. And the lowest level of war is what is called tactics, where you have the junior officers, where the battles happen, where attrition happens. So the point to make is that if the top level, topmost level, the strategic level, if there is communication gap, if there is dissonance between the political and the military leadership, it percolates down to the operational level and it comes down to the tactical level. Everything is affected. Having said that, there are certain key lessons that came out and they are relevant for our discussion, key lessons of Parakram that I just wish to talk about briefly. One is, as usual, when the army mobilized went for Parakram, it was not ready for war with Pakistan. Now, this time I am not saying this. This is there in this book by General V.K. Singh. The book is called Courage and Conviction. Now, V.K. Singh participated in Parakram. He became the army chief and he is a prominent BJP leader. And this is what he has to write on Parakram. He says, the very first few days of Operation Parakram exposed the hollowness of our operational preparedness, and he is given the details here as to how those 800 lives were lost. That there were accidents, that there were mines, anti-personnel mines that they shifted. So basically, the army was not ready for war. There are clinical details in this. Perhaps Guy, if he has not read this book, he needs to read this as well. So the army was not prepared. The second thing is that the political leadership was not prepared to fight, because what it told Padmanabhan, you mobilize, it was actually thinking that it will coerce the Pakistanis. But it didn't happen, and Parakram happened in two parts. In the second part, which was in May 2002, when the Kaluchak massacre happened in Jammu, suddenly now the temperatures rose in India, and Padmanabhan also said publicly that the army is ready for war, the military is ready for war, and everybody wanted action. And the Prime Minister also had to say something, and he did. But the NSA was worried. National Security Advisor Brijesh Mishra, he immediately got in touch with his counterpart in America, Condoleezza Rice, and requested her to do something. Then Condoleezza Rice spoke to President Bush. He in turn spoke to General Musharraf and thinks the temperature was brought down. All these details are there in Condoleezza Rice's autobiography called No Higher Honor. So the point is, the Bajpayee government was not ready for war. And on the other hand, this brings me to the third point, General Musharraf was defiant. In fact, towards the end of the 10 months of mobilization, he regularly started test firing his ballistic missiles, signaling to the Indian side that he was ready to fight and he will fight. And the fourth thing very clearly came out is a massive communication gap at the strategic level between the political and the military leadership. If I have to just sum up all this, here are the 3 points. Number one, the Indian Army does not want to prepare for hot war as much as it wants to continue with no war, no peace operations, and the reason I have already explained why it wants to do that. Number two, because of that, India does not have credible military fighting capabilities, war fighting capabilities. Otherwise, as I said, the proxy war even would end of Pakistan. And the third, there's a huge gap in the communication at the strategic level of war. Now, in comes the Modi government in 2014. Now, anybody would have expected that the first thing that the Prime Minister would do or the government would do is that all these big gaps which were noticed in Parakram, they would be plugged. They would be taken care of. Instead, what was done is that these shortcomings were used to the advantage, to their own advantage by the Modi government, which was incredible. And that is what I want to talk about now. And as far as Ghai is concerned, continuing with his narrative, his narration of Parakram, of Sindoor and how Sindoor happened, the context, he now comes to 2016. And he tells the audience that what happened in 2016 what was done by the Indian Army in 2016 was action on the vicinity of line of control. These are his words. Action on the vicinity of line of control. No senior army officer since 2016 has used these words. Everybody has called it surgical strikes were done. In fact, what Ghai said to the audience is precisely what Jay Shankar, the present External Affairs Minister, in 2016, when he was the Foreign Secretary, he told the Parliament Committee that what happened in 2016, they were low level, shallow, uh, specific counter terror operations across the line of control. And he said that these were done in the past also, but this time the government decided to take ownership of it. Now, when Ghai says a thing like this, the reason is very simple because he is aware that he is addressing foreign countries' military chiefs, and somebody could have asked him, had he said surgical strike, exactly how they were a surgical strike, because surgical strike has a specific meaning. When we talk of surgical strike, what it means in military parlance is that a certain sudden military action which goes beyond the tactical level of war and impacts either the strategic level of war or the operational level of war, gives the turns to the entire operations. That's a surgical strike normally done by air forces. However, what was said in 2016 was the then DGMO, Lieutenant General Ranbir Singh, when he addressed the media, he said that the previous night the Indian Army did surgical strikes inside Pakistan, and the Pakistani DGMO, his counterpart, was informed immediately after that the Indian Army did not want to continue any further in the mission and this mission was over. In other words, India simply did not want an escalation with Pakistan. Now, he was not the only one. All the veterans, the retired community, everybody has called it surgical strike till days. That 2016 surgical strikes were done, and of course, the media also got in and they also created the visuals of some big things happening when in fact there was nothing big happening at all. So, what is not realized is that this operation 2016, this operation will be remembered as a very significant milestone in India's military history. Why? Because by calling it a surgical strike, which it was not, by actually saying what the political leadership wanted to hear, the army chief of the time, he gave over the operational role of the army to the prime minister. Please let this sink in. It was a counter-terror operation, a shallow counter-terror operation, and the army knew about it. Now Ghai has spoken about it, but everybody decided to call it surgical strike, a big name, a narrative was built. So that the political leadership is happy, which means that the key role of the army chief, which is what I said, being the topmost operational commander, was given over to the Prime Minister by this one particular event. And we know, of course, what happened to the army chief of the time. He was General Dalbir Singh Sohag, and he became the High Commissioner to Sessions. And we also know that Lieutenant General Bipin Rawat, on 1st of September, he became the Vice Chief of the Indian Army, and 28th of September were the so-called surgical strikes done, and he was the mastermind of this. And after that, Bipin Rawat, he superseded two officers, became the army chief, had a 3-year tenure as army chief, and then became India's first chief of defense staff. Now, there's something more that happened. And for that, I have to go back to the beginning of the Modi government tenure. Modi government came to power in May of 2014, and in October of 2014, Prime Minister Modi addressed his first tri-service, his combined commanders conference. And in that combined commander conference, he said something that no prime minister before him had ever done. He said he instructed, he rather gave an operational directive to all the commanders of the three services that the threat may be known, but the enemy may be invisible. In other words, the threat is Pakistan, the enemy is terrorist. So, yes, we know the threat comes from Pakistan, but focus on the terrorist. In other words, the main focus of the Indian army should be, according to him, and of the military should be the sub conventional operations, counter terror operations. So, with the Act of 2014, he is giving this talk to the Combined Commanders Conference. At the strategic level, what we noticed was the gap, communication gap between the political and the military leadership that was now removed, and instead the prime minister took over the entire strategic level and also gave a operational directive, something that the defense minister in our dispensation he gives to the three services, based on which then they make their operational plans. So the strategic level was taken over by the prime minister in 2014, and by this 2016 he took over as the top operational commander also, because the army was quite happy to do the narrative building. And the Air Force and the Navy, they also realized that they were missing the cake, the game, which is why in 2016, after the counter-terror operations in Pakistan, the then Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal Arup Raha, he also spoke about a role for the Air Force in sub-conventional operations, something the Air Force would not have spoken of at all before the coming of Prime Minister Modi to power. And this is the reason, because the Prime Minister has taken over as the topmost operational commander, that we saw in Balakot. It is the Prime Minister, then he told the media also that there was a benefit of the cloud that we got, that is getting in the operational role. Then in 2025, the army chief told us that it is the prime minister who gave the name to the Operation Sindoor. So there is enough evidence that the prime minister is now in total control of both the strategic and the operational level of war. So what are the three chiefs doing? That is the point. So in my assessment, the three chiefs are now looking at tactics and they are looking at narrative building. That is the task left to them. So when the chiefs say that we did a tri-service operation, Operation Sindoor, so they were looking after the tactics, because there is enough evidence. The Indian naval attaché in Indonesia also has mentioned that there were certain constraints under which the Indian Air Force was operating. So those constraints were brought in at the operational level of war. So when I say that the task now is tactics and narrative building, we have seen a lot about narrative building happening. In fact, one example of narrative building is that a former army chief, Naravne, who's written a book, it has been with the publisher for the last 1 year. It has still not got the clearance from the political authorities, whereas there are so many books which have come out in the market on Operation Sindoor, which have completely ignored, totally whitewashed the air war of 6-7, which was the most important event of the 4 days Operation Sindoor. And I have no doubts that this book that I wrote with my colleague Ghazala Wahab, Dragon on Our Doorstep, this came out in January 2017. And if you see the opening line of this book, it says, "Let alone China, India cannot even win a war with Pakistan." And I have explained the details in this book, and obviously the basic premise remains the same what I had wrote 25 years back, that India simply does not have the capabilities to fight a war with Pakistan. Otherwise, the Pakistanis would stop their proxy war into India. So if this book had come out now, it would it would not have seen the light of the day. It would not have come out. Now, As far as narrative building is concerned, the sterling example of narrative building is what we have seen after Operation Sindoor in the discourse that is going on. And this is what was said by Ghai also to his audience, where Ghai shows the visuals of the damage which was done, particularly on the night of 9th, 10th May by the Indian military, by the tri-service operation, and where Air Force also played a very important role. And yes, all that damage is worth patting. It is commendable. What all? Because the visuals are there. They cannot be denied. But here is the point that Ghai did not speak of, that nobody in this country speaks of, but this is a point, a crucial point of the 4 days that has been noticed by the world experts. And that point is between India and Pakistan with a contiguous border. The key to a operation or winning or losing a war will be the role of the Air Force, and the main role of the Air Force is to get air supremacy. And for air supremacy, the main mission has to be air to air operations. And what Ghai has been talking of, or what everybody has been talking of, are counter air operations, both offensive counter air and both defensive counter air. Any person who understands military or the air forces will know that the counter air operation, they are in support of the main mission of the Air Force, that is air to air operations. And this is where the world notice the Pakistan Air Force give a good account of itself. And why they are important is, first of all, Pakistan Air Force did two things. It gave a good account of its electronic warfare. I won't go in the details now. I've already explained it in so many videos. And the second thing what they did was that they used the BBR. Now we are not any longer in the age of dogfights for air-to-air supremacy. It's about beyond visual range. So they could fire a missile at a range of 143 kilometers with the help of a digital ecosystem. Getting an ecosystem in place and training on that ecosystem or building electronic warfare, it takes years of work. And that is what was noticed by the world. Getting a S-400, which is perhaps the best system in its class in the world today, is good, but all it needs is a little training. And counter-air operation, yes, are very good of the Indian Air Force. In fact, Indian Air Force is a great Air Force. There's no doubt about it, except that what I said, that in my assessment, it was functioning under constraints, operational constraints. I've already explained that. But the consequence of that is that the profile of the profile of Pakistan's military, it has shot up, and the profile of Pakistan as far as geopolitics is concerned, it has also shot up. And here is the big thing. The big thing as far as I am concerned of Operation Sindoor is that after the 1971 war, the world thought that India's victory in that war was because India's conventional war capability was far superior to Pakistan's conventional war capability. Now that thinking has been shattered, it has been destroyed by Operation Sindoor. What I'll do is that in my next video, I'll explain the lessons from Operation Sindoor, and I'll put them under three heads of nature of war, character of war, and what I call the complexion of war. If you like my videos, please do subscribe to my videos. Thank you so much.